Martha Linton's Buick sedan had barely stopped rolling before a fluorescent pink slip flapped onto her windshield. The slap of paper against glass echoed louder in her mind than it did in the sleepy cul-de-sac of Orchard Hills. She stepped out of the car, her leather sandals clicking softly on the warm pavement, and stared at the offending document. Violation, it screamed in bold letters, followed by improper vehicle angle, blocking sightline. She blinked in disbelief. The Buick was at most 2 inches askew from the curb. It hadn't even crossed into her neighbor's space. Holding the slip like it might bite her, Martha glanced around. No one waved. No one smiled. She could see old Mr. Halvorsen tending to his azaleas, but even he avoided her eye. This wasn't the Orchard Hills she'd known before she left for Tallahassee 3 weeks ago. Back then, folks exchanged mail over fences, traded tomatoes and stories. But now, the silence was taut. Inside her neat little home, still faintly smelling of lavender detergent and lemon oil, she set her suitcase by the door and poured a glass of water. The Florida heat had not mellowed with September's arrival. A lizard skittered across the porch rail, its throat puffing like a tiny balloon. Loretta would know what was going on. 10 minutes later, Martha's Buick pulled into the lot behind Sunrise Diner, its sign flickering against the morning glare. She found Loretta in their usual booth, tapping her spoon against the edge of her coffee mug in rhythm with the faint Glenn Miller tune playing overhead. I leave for 3 weeks, and Orchard Hills turns into a police state. Martha slid into the booth, letting the paper slap onto the Formica tabletop. Loretta picked it up, squinting without her reading glasses. Another one, she muttered. Another? Loretta nodded. You're the 4th this week. Tom over on Clementine got dinged for having wind chimes. Noise pollution. Can you believe that? Martha sipped her coffee slowly, letting the bitter warmth settle her nerves. What happened? This place used to run on lemonade and porch gossip. Karen, Loretta replied, her voice soft and sour. She pushed through changes at the last HOA meeting, tightened rules, added penalties. Claimed it was to preserve neighborhood standards. Most folks didn't even know about the vote. She handpicked the committee. Martha arched a brow. And no one's pushing back. Some tried, Loretta said. But she's got this new thing, form emails, generic denials. You'll see. Later that afternoon, Martha did see. She called the HOA number, expecting a neighborly chat with Karen Winslow. Instead, a clipped voicemail directed her to a website. When she submitted her complaint online, the reply came within minutes, an auto-generated email with an attachment titled Covenant Enforcement Clarification. That night, as the sun bled orange over the swaying palms, Martha walked the block. A faded pink notice fluttered from a neighbor's door. Another stuck to a mailbox. An elderly woman 2 houses down was arguing with her husband about trimming their hibiscus bushes to regulation height. When Martha returned home, frustration simmered in her chest like the evening humidity. She reached for her phone, ready to vent, but paused. She needed something more than indignation. She needed facts. The next morning, she met Loretta again at sunrise. This time, Loretta wasn't sipping coffee or humming. She looked grave. Before you go barging into the HOA meeting, she said, her hand resting lightly on Martha's arm, there's something you need to read. She reached into her large canvas tote and pulled out a weathered manila folder. This, Loretta said, laying it gently on the table, is the original charter from 2004. The one they don't want you to know exists. On the folder, in smudged black ink, the words, Orchard Hills HOA, founding bylaws, whispered of long-buried intentions and forgotten promises. The charter smelled of musty paper and the slow creep of forgotten power. Martha traced her fingers along the brittle edges of the document. The yellowing pages were unevenly clipped, marked in the margins with fountain pen notes from 2 decades ago. Loretta had kept it in a folder tucked behind her grandmother's hymnals, a place safe from curiosity and convenience alike. Karen's smile in last month's newsletter now felt more like a warning. Martha squinted at a section underlined in faint blue ink, Section 3.2, Access to Common Facilities. According to the document, all residents had equal, open access to communal areas, clubhouse, garden, fitness room, without pre-approval. But she remembered that 2 weeks ago, when she'd asked about using the event patio for Loretta's birthday, she was told she needed a signed request submitted 14 days in advance, plus an approval vote. It hadn't always been that way. She copied the clause into a spiral-bound notebook, comparing it with the version attached to the recent email response. The revised version removed key language, replacing equal access with discretionary allocation. When she stepped into Sunrise Diner just before noon, the heat wrapped around her like a damp quilt. Inside, the ceiling fans stirred lazy arcs overhead. Dana sat closest to the window, her blouse floral and crisp. Sylvia was already nibbling at a biscuit, while Harvey nursed his usual black coffee, his cap reading U.S. Navy veteran slightly askew. They called themselves Golden Four only half-jokingly. More gold in our memories than our teeth, Dana once quipped. We've all noticed it, Sylvia said after Martha explained the discrepancies. Since that vote last year, the HOA's been tightening the noose. But we never saw minutes from that meeting, Dana added. They claimed they were still being formatted. That was 11 months ago. Harvey grunted. That's how it starts, change the rules while folks are busy watching their soaps and walking their chihuahuas. Martha opened her laptop, balancing it against a chipped sugar dispenser. She had begun assembling a table of inconsistencies, side-by-side comparisons of the charter and the current policy handbook. There were at least 6 altered sections, all curbing rights and expanding HOA enforcement language. Dana waved her phone. Elliot says he'll call in 5 minutes. I told him you need a tech miracle. When Elliot's face appeared on a cracked iPad, he was seated in a cluttered dorm-style apartment, half a model drone behind him. Let me guess, HOA trouble again? Martha smiled. I just need help confirming where these emails are coming from. She forwarded the last email she'd received. Elliot typed furiously, the sound of his keyboard pattering like rain. After a moment, he leaned back. Okay, this is weird. The return path's not at orchardhillsha.org. It's at orchardh.net, registered only 6 months ago. Sylvia nearly dropped her fork. You mean it's fake? Maybe not entirely. It could be a shell domain, used to bypass some regulations, Elliot said. But it's not the original. And legally, that matters. Dana bit into her biscuit, lips tightening. It's all changed. This place used to host monthly socials, line dancing, even outdoor movies. Now it's just notices and fines. Harvey wiped his mouth. Florida law says HOA records must be accessible to residents. If they refuse to provide minutes or financials, that's a red flag. The waitress came by with more coffee and a warm apple pie, which Loretta had pre-ordered for the table. Martha tucked the original charter back into its folder, but not before highlighting another clause, amendments require 2/3 resident approval. She was willing to bet none of them had seen a ballot. That evening, she typed an email to the HOA board formally requesting the minutes of the past 3 meetings. She clicked send and waited. Within minutes, the response arrived. Your current status as a non-committee member does not meet the qualifications for internal access. Her fingers tightened around the mouse. The wording was surgical, clean, designed to shut down without revealing anything. The phone rang sharply. Loretta didn't waste time with pleasantries. Nina will meet you, she said. But she wants you to bring the original charter with you. Nina's office was a modest building shaded by an old oak, but her words carried the weight of a gavel. Martha adjusted the strap of her handbag as she stepped into the cooled reception area, noting the framed degrees lining the walls and a faint scent of lemon polish. The receptionist barely had time to offer coffee before Nina Woodhouse emerged, purposeful in her stride, her silver-streaked bun immaculately pinned. Martha had expected someone brusque, maybe intimidating. But Nina's handshake was firm without being aggressive, and her first question cut straight to the core. Tell me about the charter. By the time the folder was open on Nina's desk, the lawyer's brow had furrowed. This clause here, she said, tapping her Mont Blanc pen beside a footnote, used to grant shared access to green spaces. Now it's restricted to board-approved functions only. That change wasn't filed publicly. Florida Statute 720.306 requires member vote for amendments. Martha leaned forward. So it's illegal? Improper, at best. Grounds for challenge. Nina pulled a fresh sheet of legal stationery. I can draft a collective injunction, but we need signatures. At least 10 residents, preferably more. Back in Orchard Hills, the diner bustled less with conversation than shared curiosity. Martha recounted Nina's conclusions to the Golden Four, Loretta's fingers tightening around her coffee mug. I'll sign, she said. So will Dana, I bet. Harvey grunted in agreement. Been itching to call their bluff since they closed the shuffleboard court. Martha smiled, half relief, half resolve. They'd need strategy now. She sketched a rough chart on a napkin, names, contacts, infractions. By the next day, they had 5 signatures. Then came the email announcement, an emergency HOA meeting. The timing felt no coincidence. The room where they gathered had once hosted potlucks and birthday parties. Now it was arranged like a courtroom. Folding chairs in rows, a long table draped in white linen at the front. Karen Winslow stood behind it, wearing a beige suit that blended into the background, except for the glint of her gold watch. Her voice was calm as she opened. We are aware of concerns raised about recent administrative changes. Let me assure everyone, there has been no misconduct. When Martha raised her hand, Karen motioned her down gently. This isn't a debate forum. But the tension in the room thickened as Elliot, seated near the front, stood up. May I? He asked, holding his phone. I'd like to read something. He scrolled and cleared his throat. An email dated August 14th, sent to all HOA members. The return address is admin@orchardhills-info.net, note, not.org. It states that all community access policies were updated under emergency provisions, and no vote was needed. That's not only misleading, it's legally void. Murmurs broke out. One woman turned to her neighbor and whispered, "That's not the email I got." Another man frowned, pulling up his inbox. Karen's composed exterior cracked. She slammed her palm on the table, rattling the water pitcher. I will not let this HOA be dismantled by a group of residents who do not understand the law. Nina, seated quietly at the side, waited for the silence to fall. Then, with a smile that held the steadiness of steel, she opened her briefcase. May I remind everyone, she said softly, that I do. And she placed a document on the table, its title in bold, intent to file injunction. Karen thought she'd buried the past under new bylaws. She didn't expect it to rise with signatures in ink. The first leaves had begun to change color, their crisp edges whispering across sidewalks as Martha stepped out with a satchel full of documents and a tin of pumpkin bread. Orchard Hills had entered October like a town holding its breath, quiet, observant, tinged with a cautious hope. Martha and the Golden Four moved house to house, their knocks gentle but persistent, voices firm yet kind. Some doors opened with smiles, others with suspicion. At Mrs. Ellerby's, Martha offered a slice of bread before a word. We're not here to stir trouble, she said. Just to set things right. Ellerby hesitated, then took the clipboard with trembling fingers, reading every line twice before signing. But not everyone followed. Mr. Chow shook his head before Martha finished her sentence. They'll cut my access to the pool. Last time I complained, my mailbox disappeared overnight. Even when Loretta explained the forged amendment, he gently closed the door. I'm sorry. I just want peace. Elliot, ever the quiet force behind the scenes, launched a secure internal site, password protected, updated daily. It listed every clause in the original charter alongside the altered one, flagged inconsistencies, and detailed steps already taken. Martha printed flyers with login instructions in large font, leaving them with cautious neighbors and sliding a few under unopened doors. In the early evenings, they gathered at the park gazebo. The cicadas had quieted with the weather, and laughter occasionally returned to the benches. Harvey handed out pens like a general with medals. Dana recounted tales of old HOA parties, painting a time when Orchard Hills was about community, not control. Nina reminded them during a check-in call that 15 signatures would push the case to the next level. "It gives us ground," she said. "And a court date." Loretta, always strategic, approached Mr. Robbins with care. She brought his favorite newspaper and a flask of strong coffee. "You remember 88, she asked, easing onto the porch step. "That developer tried to wall off the west path." Robbins squinted. "He lost." "Because you led the charge," she smiled. "I need that man again." His cane tapped once against the floor. "I'm not who I was, Loretta. You're still the man with the clearest eyes in this neighborhood." By Sunday, the stack of signed pages sat on Martha's kitchen table like a promise. 17 neighbors showed up that afternoon, gathering near the fountain where Halloween banners fluttered. They wore autumn sweaters and carried Tupperware dishes. Martha stood quietly, a clipboard in hand and the light just catching the hopeful crease at her mouth. 16, she announced. "We're one short." A pause stretched into silence, until the familiar knock of Robbins's cane echoed on brick. He didn't speak. He simply stepped forward, signed, and handed the pen back to Martha with a curt nod. Nina received the packet later that night. She flipped through the pages, counted twice, and ran her fingers along the ink. "Perfect," she said, and her smile curled just enough to hint at mischief. "It's time to send Orchard Hills an early Halloween gift." By the time the injunction hit Karen's desk, the HOA office was already half empty. Light filtered through the slats of the dusty blinds, illuminating the laminated rules on the wall and casting thin shadows across Karen's desk. Outside, wind tousled a few plastic ghosts dangling from the eaves, their squeaky dance a reminder of the coming season. Karen read the cover page of the court order once, then again. The stamp at the bottom, official, blue, and irreversible, seemed to burn through the paper. Down the hall, 2 junior clerks murmured and closed their laptops. One of them, a college intern, quietly removed a framed award from the wall. Karen didn't speak, but her jaw clenched so tightly the skin around her temples pulsed. The HOA emergency meeting was set for that evening. The clubhouse, half-dressed in Halloween garlands and fake cobwebs, felt oddly staged. A single jack-o'-lantern sat near the podium, its flickering LED bulb dim against the rising tension. Chairs scraped as they filled, mostly with faces older and tighter than usual, some confused, some furious, many just tired. Martha took a seat near the middle, flanked by Loretta and Harvey. She carried a folder but kept it closed. Elliot lingered by the doorway, his phone tucked discreetly in his jacket pocket. Nina hadn't arrived yet. Karen entered with the stride of someone used to applause and got silence instead. She cleared her throat, forced a smile. "Let's begin." She outlined the recent challenges in the neighborhood, avoiding the word injunction. When questions rose, why weren't we consulted? Who authorized the charter change? She waved them off. You've all benefited from these policies. Order doesn't maintain itself. When Martha stood, Karen's voice sliced through hers. This is not a public forum. Martha sat back slowly, but the murmur didn't stop. It grew. Tom Winslow stood in the rear, arms crossed, head down. When his wife mentioned full transparency, his jaw twitched. Karen didn't notice. She was too focused on quelling the momentum, too used to winning with words. Outside, a gust shook the clubhouse door. Elliot's eyes flicked to the clock. Right on time. The door opened. Deputy Marshal Clark stepped in, his boots echoing against the linoleum. He wore no expression as he approached the podium and handed Karen a sealed envelope. By court order, he said, the Homeowners Association's accounts are hereby frozen, pending judicial review. Karen stared at the document in her hands. The room fell into stunned silence. The paper crinkled in her grip. She looked up, and found every eye on her. For the first time, Karen had no words. Behind her, a lantern slipped loose from its hook and fell to the floor. The brittle plastic cracked where it landed, the candle inside flickering once before it went dark. Someone coughed. Then Loretta stood and motioned to the door. One by one, neighbors followed her outside, their footsteps softer than the silence they left behind. At Martha's house, the porch lights were already on. A folding table held trays of pumpkin-shaped cookies, warm cider in paper cups, and plates of brownies wrapped in orange napkins. Laughter, tentative but growing, drifted up from the backyard where Elliot helped a teen volunteer fix the garden fence. Nina stood by the window, notebook in hand, her expression calm. She wasn't here to celebrate. She was watching. Truth travels slowly, but once it arrives, it doesn't knock, it walks right in. At Orchard Bean Cafe, sunlight poured through tall windows onto time-worn wooden floors, catching the dust motes dancing in lazy spirals. The gentle notes of an old Chet Baker tune lilted across the morning air. Patrons murmured over steaming cups of coffee and flaky cinnamon biscuits, oblivious to the digital arsenal being assembled at the corner booth. Elliot sat hunched over his laptop, face half illuminated by the glow of multiple open windows. Beside him, Nina Woodhouse methodically tapped on her tablet, stylus moving with precision as she annotated timestamps and matched file names. Across from them, Martha nursed a plain black coffee, her eyes locked on the screen even though the technical language swam in her vision. "This redirect chain is the smoking gun," Elliot said, zooming in on a series of IP logs. Every message labeled board approved over the last 10 months passed through this proxy address. Not HOA. Some private server registered anonymously. Martha leaned forward. So they've been faking approvals? Not exactly faking, Nina murmured, but diverting visibility. They've centralized control behind closed doors. And this, she pointed to a particular line, shows the moment they removed access from general members. The realization settled over them like a thundercloud. Across the neighborhood, Loretta's backyard had become a quiet sanctuary for discontent. Rows of metal chairs formed loose arcs around folding tables adorned with paper plates and a generous bowl of peanut brittle. On the deck, Sylvia recounted her story. "They didn't just deny my son. They said his name wasn't in the directory, after 25 years of me living here. That's not just oversight, that's exclusion." A few neighbors nodded solemnly. Mr. Robbins clutched his walking cane, listening more intently than he let on. Just behind the gathering, Loretta walked with a reporter from the local Gazette. "It's not just bureaucracy," she said, lowering her voice. "It's a culture shift. We used to host monthly potlucks. Now it's violation notices and surveillance cameras." Back at the cafe, Elliot brought up another screen, a digital map overlaid with HOA expenditure data. "This red zone is new planting, see the cost tag? $15,000. Martha frowned. "But the community garden hasn't been touched." Elliot smirked. "Exactly. Satellite imagery cross-referenced with dates shows the work happened at one property only, Karen Winslow's." The door chime jingled. Tom Winslow entered, gaze sweeping the cafe before settling on their table. His expression was weary, but his stride was sure. In his hand was a small object, clenched like a confession. "I don't want to fight," he said as he arrived. "But I also can't pretend anymore." He placed a USB drive on the table and walked away before anyone could reply. Later that afternoon, in Nina's quiet office filled with law books and the scent of bergamot, the contents of the drive unraveled like a courtroom thriller. One document bore Karen's signature, except it was a copy-and-paste forgery. It redirected budget lines meant for playground repair to aesthetic upgrades, with no approval vote. Another file was even more damning, internal notes from a closed-door meeting, where Karen had declared, "If we don't control the funds, we lose the neighborhood." Nina scrolled slowly, eyes narrowing. She reached the end of the folder and clicked the final document, an audio file. Karen's voice echoed from the laptop, "No one reads the bylaws anyway. They'll believe whatever's in the newsletter." Silence followed, thick and cold. Nina looked up, calm but unyielding. "This isn't just a violation of HOA policy," she said quietly. "It's financial fraud." Tom's footsteps echoed faintly as he exited the cafe, his shoulders squared against a weight he had carried in silence for too long. Martha watched him go, a swirl of conflicting thoughts in her chest. She had never pitied Karen, but she suddenly understood the toll of building walls, even if only to keep out the truth. Back at Loretta's, the crowd had grown. A retired teacher brought oatmeal cookies, a Vietnam vet offered cider from his backyard apples. Their voices grew louder, steadier. The Gazette journalist recorded testimonies. Neighbors compared letters, fines, even photos of the same shrubs cited multiple times for nonconformity. By late afternoon, the coffee circle had transformed into a living archive of resistance. In the quiet corner of the Bean, Nina began drafting a timeline, cross-referencing dates, financial records, and now the USB contents. Every line painted a clearer picture. This wasn't negligence, it was orchestration. They tried to build a fortress of paperwork, she muttered, but forgot that paper burns. Martha placed a hand on Nina's wrist. Do we have enough? Nina didn't look up. More than enough to begin. As they stood to leave, Elliot paused to glance at the window. Outside, kids rode their bikes along the sidewalk where a new "no parking" sign had recently gone up. An older woman knelt by her mailbox, gently cleaning graffiti someone had scribbled weeks ago. None of it was right. But maybe, finally, it would be made right. And somewhere in the clubhouse, still decorated with drooping Halloween streamers, a jack-o'-lantern leaned sideways on its hook. The smile carved into its face had begun to sag, just slightly, as if it too had seen the truth coming down the road. By the time the hearing began, the neighborhood already knew the verdict in their hearts. Martha sat quietly in the front row of the courthouse, her palms folded gently over her lap, her breath steady despite the swirl of anticipation. Outside, golden leaves rustled across the courthouse steps in the brisk October breeze. Inside, the wood-paneled room bore the weight of silence. Faces familiar and weathered filled the benches, neighbors, friends, skeptics turned believers. Loretta leaned close and whispered, "Feels just like that school board hearing back in '84, doesn't it?" Martha nodded, remembering the same tension in her spine. But this time, it wasn't about saving a library. It was about saving their neighborhood from itself. Judge Wilson entered like a breeze settling into a room, old, composed, eyes sharp despite the gentle tone in his voice. "Let's begin," he said. His gavel touched wood, and silence obeyed. Nina rose, documents in hand, each movement deliberate. Her voice carried conviction, but it was never harsh. She laid out the case: unauthorized amendments to the HOA charter, the suppression of meeting minutes, manipulation of access rights, and the misappropriation of funds labeled as community beautification. She didn't dramatize. She didn't need to. The facts spoke plainly, and the room listened. Karen sat stiffly at the table opposite. Her suit was charcoal gray today, her hands clasped tightly before her. When it was her turn, she stood and spoke with a familiar sharpness. "Order isn't tyranny," she snapped. "I did what I had to. These accusations come from people who never volunteered, who never read the rules." She turned to the crowd. "You resent me because I did what you couldn't, keep this place from falling apart." The room murmured, and Judge Wilson raised his hand. "We'll stick to evidence, not emotion." Tom was called next. He walked slowly, adjusting his collar as if it were choking him. When he reached the stand, he avoided Karen's eyes. "Some of the signatures," he said, "weren't collected. They were copied. The budget reports, I saw the drafts. She changed them." His voice cracked, not from weakness, but from the weight of having stayed silent too long. Nina offered no celebration. She merely handed over the USB Tom had given Martha. Judge Wilson reviewed it in quiet, nodding at intervals, his brow drawn. "The purpose of an HOA," he finally said, "is not control, but stewardship. When governance turns to concealment, the foundation shifts, from community to command." Karen said nothing more. She sat motionless, her gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the window. The gavel came down. The court finds sufficient cause for the suspension of Karen Winslow from all HOA responsibilities, effective immediately. The board is to conduct a transparent election within 30 days. Misused funds will be restored from the HOA reserves, pending audit. The sound was not thunderous, but it shook the room all the same. People didn't cheer. They exhaled. Karen stood. She gathered her purse slowly, as if weighed down not by objects but by the echo of years past. She turned to leave, heels clicking faintly on the tiled floor. No one followed her. No hands reached out. The door creaked closed behind her. Elliot leaned toward Tom as he stepped off the stand. He didn't speak, just placed a steady hand on his shoulder. Tom nodded once, the lines on his face softening. Nina returned to her seat. A bouquet of white chrysanthemums now rested there, delicate, fragrant, and full of quiet thanks. As the room emptied, Martha lingered, eyes drawn to the empty seat Karen had left behind. A pale blue handkerchief sat tucked between the chair and table. She picked it up, folded it gently, and placed it on the desk. Not as a gesture of forgiveness, but of finality and of grace. Underscore 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 underscore. Outside the courtroom, the sun filtered through the trees, casting warm light on the sidewalk as neighbors stood in quiet clusters. Some hugged. Others shook hands with Nina or clapped Elliot gently on the back. Loretta pulled Martha into an embrace and whispered, "We didn't just win, did we? We remembered who we are." Across the street, the faded sign for Orchard Hills stood crookedly, its lettering chipped, ivy growing up the post. For the first time in years, it didn't feel oppressive. It just felt like a place again. Tom lingered behind, speaking with the HOA treasurer and 2 longtime board members. Martha caught pieces of the conversation: transparency, reform, rebuilding trust. She hoped they meant it. Later that afternoon, a handwritten notice went up on the community board at the clubhouse. Interim HOA meeting, all voices welcome. No logos, no formal seals. Just ink and intention. At Loretta's backyard that evening, the Golden Four gathered under strings of dim patio lights. Harvey brought sparkling cider. Dana lit a citronella candle. Elliot set up a folding table with snacks. It wasn't a victory party. It was something quieter. Better. Martha passed around slices of warm pumpkin bread and accepted the seat at the head of the table, not as a leader, but as a neighbor among equals. "I thought I was too old to raise hell," she said, smiling gently. "Turns out, I was just waiting for the right reason." Laughter danced through the night air. Back in her home, she placed the blue handkerchief in a drawer, not as a keepsake, but a reminder. Of what silence costs. Of what courage demands. And somewhere down the road, under a streetlight just starting to flicker on, the jack-o'-lantern by the clubhouse sat quietly, its flicker steady now, casting soft, orange light on the newly posted words. Community is not a code, it's a choice. The air smelled of cinnamon and pine, and something else, quiet relief. Mid-November had arrived with crisp mornings and gold-filtered sunsets, and this year, the clubhouse doors were open to everyone. No permits required. No clipboard checks. Just neighbors. Inside, the scent of roasted turkey mingled with honey-glazed carrots and freshly baked rolls. Loretta stood near the entrance, directing a couple of teenagers as they strung lights across the beams. "This year," she declared, "no one has to ask for permission to hang a paper turkey." Laughter bubbled from the kitchen, where Sylvia gently laid out her homemade apple pie. "I used to worry about fines if I brought food that wasn't pre-approved," she said to Harvey. "Now I worry if we'll have enough whipped cream." Elliot walked in with a clipboard, not for enforcement, but to note who needed a ride home or help carrying leftovers. At just 28, he had become the youngest HOA president in Orchard Hills history. He nodded to Martha with a grin that made his resemblance to his grandmother Dana all the more evident. Martha smiled back. She wore her signature shawl and held a small stack of note cards. When the crowd quieted for a moment, she stood near the fireplace and cleared her throat. I was once fined, she began, for planting a fig tree in 1981. The room chuckled. And again, this year, for parking my old Buick just a little off-angle. She paused, her voice steady. But what I've gained is something no rulebook can govern, the strength of neighbors who remember how to listen, and how to stand up when things go wrong. The applause was gentle, warm. Not celebratory in the loud, brash way, but like the rustle of trees agreeing with the wind. Near the back table, Tom Winslow quietly placed a bowl of cranberry sauce beside Sylvia's pie. He said nothing. But those who noticed gave a silent nod of acknowledgement. Some bridges weren't rebuilt overnight, but steps had been taken. Harvey offered Loretta his arm. May I have this dance, before the pies steal the spotlight? Glenn Miller's Moonlight Serenade spilled through the old clubhouse speakers. As Loretta and Harvey began to sway, the room felt transported. A girl in a sunflower dress twirled beside her grandmother. Even Elliot was pulled into a slow shuffle by Dana's determined look. Outside, beneath the early dusk, lanterns glowed along the clubhouse path. Children ran with paper leaves pinned to their shirts, labeled "Thankful For," in shaky crayon scrawl. Some read, "My dog," others, "Mom," one simply said, "Sunlight." In a quiet corner, Martha sat beside Loretta, sipping cider and watching the dance floor slowly fill. "Do you think Karen will ever come back?" she asked softly. Loretta tilted her head. "Maybe. But not with the same keys." Martha nodded. "That's all right. We changed the locks, with trust." The final song played. A slow jazz number that sounded like a memory. As it ended, the room didn't fall silent, it simply exhaled. Martha walked outside and looked up. The windows behind her glowed amber, their light reaching out into the leaf-strewn street. She whispered, This is the orchard hills I chose to spend the rest of my life in." A pine-scented breeze danced past, and somewhere inside, someone lit another cinnamon candle. The lights had dimmed, the music faded, but something lingered in Orchard Hills, something stronger than bylaws or ballots. In the quiet that followed, neighbors remembered what it felt like to stand side by side, not toe the line. Power, after all, is only as strong as the silence around it, and this time, the silence had been broken. When rules are used to build trust, a neighborhood becomes a home. And maybe, just maybe, it's never too late to knock on your neighbor's door, and start again.